Technology decides everything, and that's true. That's why constitutional arguments go nowhere, because the law is reflecting a realism that we haven't accepted in our head, that is based on what technology needs or what the economy needs, the law and economics, and it is inherently anti-person in favor of the economy or the technology. All right, this one's on technocracy, information technology, sustainable development, and government modernization. And I only have like 21 slides, so this is not going to take that long. All right, here we go. This is a slide from a NASCO conference that I attended. And I think this one was in Fort Worth, Texas, either 2008, I think it was. And one of the keynote speakers was a man who charges $15,000 to speak. See, you guys are 40, right?
No, I'll tell you later.
$15,000. His name was Michael Gallis, and he is with Gallis, Michael Gallis and Associates. And I want to say they're futurists, but they are consultants about transportation issues and other issues. Well, this was one of his slides, and I filmed it. And of course, they later on said, "Well, you can't film." Well, yeah, I filmed it. Thanks to the internet, I found his slides, the whole presentation on the internet someplace. But anyway, when he was presenting this, it was preceded by a slide that said 20th century revolution. Black slide, revolution written across the front. The revolution was the opening up of the communist bloc countries, the passage of the opening up of trading blocs, all right? Going to those NASCO conferences was my first exposure to people that had no loyalty to the country in which they were born. A lot of them had dual citizenship. And they worked for Ford Motor Company.
What's NASCO?
NASCO, North America's Super Corridor Coalition. They are an international transportation coalition that we found when we were looking at the Trans-Texas Corridor. And anytime I say something you don't understand what it is, just raise your hand like that. Anyway, so it was one of their meetings. And that was my first exposure to dual citizenship, the concept of that. Well, other NASCO presentations, including Michael Gallis's, really just said that the world is broken up into 5 trading blocs. That's it, okay? 5 trading blocs means there's no borders between states, nations, etc. And is only looked at from a commercial aspect or trading aspect, right? It is a system. His presentation was on transportation systems, and he actually said there's only one transportation system. The U.S. is a subset of it, and our roads and highways are just a component. Right? It's one transportation system. Well, this slide shows the global network, as they called it, the global network. And what this is a diagram of travel routes. This is air. This is sea travel. This is the communication network, and the little X's, those aren't really X's, those are satellites. And the satellite systems, that's collecting the data from all these other systems, these interconnected systems. This is communication systems, transportation systems, and then you have the data collection systems that are facilitated or hovered over by the satellite system. All of the satellites, regardless of which country sends them up, are interoperable with one another. U.S. satellites, the Russian satellites, the Indian, the Pakistan, Japan, they're all interoperable, which is an agreement and intentional for information sharing purposes. Okay? All right. I mentioned before that OKSAFE started in 2006, and the issue that got our attention was the Trans-Texas Corridor. I and a couple other people went down to Sherman, Texas, actually attended a Trans-Texas Corridor meeting, and in there with the Federal Highway Administration had a representative, the Texas Department of Transportation had a representative, and it was one of those facilitated meetings, and they had the easels of proposed corridors, big maps on easels, and all these homeowners and property owners were there looking at proposed routes, and they were giving their input. They had 3 minutes, their input on the proposed route. Well, of course, the proposed route was already determined. It was a facilitated meeting. What they're building, though, is part of the Intelligent Vehicle Highway System, a smart corridor that's got capabilities for local tracking. Well, that was in 2006. That's when we found NASCO, North American Super Corridor Coalition. The other name was actually codified into law in a resolution called the NAFTA Superhighway. And a superhighway is not a highway just by itself. It's a corridor, which includes communication systems, air, rail, barges, whatever. It's a transportation corridor that has intelligence in it for advanced technology for tracking purposes. That was where we found the Intelligent Vehicle Highway System. That's how we began the exploration of RFID technology and the sensors, okay, sending and receiving signals for tracking purposes. I'm an old retailer, and RFID was used for inventory control purposes. You tag an object, a person, an object, and then you can find it wherever it is in the store, for instance. All right, global supply chain management was from point of stuffing the container, traveling the 7 seas, offshore in, for instance, the western side of Mexico, onto trains or onto trucks, up through Mexico, through the southern port of Texas, the southern border of Texas, and then from that through the U.S. highway system, either on Canada or distributed throughout the United States. That is global supply chain management, but the intent is that once it's stuffed in the container, it is never opened again until it gets to, for instance, Kansas City. Global supply, trackable all the way. All right, and that was where we encountered public-private partnerships, the long-term agreements between government and a private entity, in that case, Texas Department of Transportation and Sintra Concesiones out of Spain. They were a big developer of toll roads nationally and internationally. Next issue we addressed was the Real ID Act, and we met Kay through that with the collection of biometrics. I mean, the ID, a national ID, which was really an international ID because of all the standards that were involved were actually international standards. Light bulbs starting to go off here. Okay. Personally identifiable biometric information on everybody. Remote ID via closed circuit TV and a global computer technology system. The language is global. So this is the beginning of what we're finding. That led to super corridors and the high priority corridors, the transportation laws that the federal government passed, our building infrastructure in Mexico, up to 200 miles in there in our interests. When we asked Senator Jim Inhofe at a meeting about the transportation funding, I asked the question, why are we funding infrastructure in Mexico? And he refused to give an answer. Change the subject. Super corridors. What is a super corridor is all those other transportation modes, multimodal transportation in there, but they are all common. What's in common with them is that they have advanced technology systems, either embedded sensors, RFID, electronic tolling, etc. All right, so we've got that going through there. Electronic tolling, then vehicle tracking. We move from a pike pass that does have a sensor in it to a tag that has a sensor in it. The equipment in your car has a sensor in it. People are starting to get TomTom Go's and GPS tracking, and their phones have tracking in it. All of a sudden, you're volunteering your position. Okay, it's not so that OnStar can help you, etc. Well, they do help you, but they're also identifying where you are the entire time you're traveling. Fusion centers. We go from that. We go into fusion centers. And that was the study of the elimination of any barriers to information sharing between the federal, state, local, and tribal law enforcement agencies. The whole justice system. Information sharing, where traditionally there would be legal and institutional barriers. You can't get it unless you give me a search warrant or you have demonstrated need to know. Gone. So there's that window and access to the data that's held in all those diverse places. Began to realize it's not a major database that's being formed in one place, it's access to many databases that are the holders of the data so that they can extract it, because they, at that point, it was the federal government. Well, fusion centers are connected to Interpol. The fusion centers are international and put in all kinds of places. The language that makes those computer systems work is a unique, it's a common language called the Global XML, Extensible Markup Language. So regardless of what it says on the front screen, behind the scene, the software, it's all the same computer language. There was where we did the Tower of Babel, 2009 Fusion Center presentations, began to see. This is the Tower of Babel, and we showed that Vision 2015 diagram, which I think everybody in here has seen, which is this data collection system to give decision advantage to the customer. In this case, the customer is not you and I. The customer would be warfighters, governments, policymakers, and corporations. So the data collection is to provide decision advantage to those customers. Okay? So that's what that is. And the global data collection, we're seeing that data is being collected, which is predicated on every bit of information, persons, places, things, and events, all being expressed in digital format. The common thread through all of that is standardized digital data collection, the aggregation, the analysis of it, they're looking at it, and the sharing via advanced IT, information technology systems. That was the common thread. We didn't start out with that. We were fighting the Trans-Texas Corridor coming into the state of Oklahoma. That is a land grab issue. That's an eminent domain issue. That's a sovereignty issue. What it was an information technology system. The next couple of years were, again, the going back and exploring sustainable development and the whole concept of that. Resource management, the education for sustainable development. We're living in the decade of education for sustainable development, which runs from 2004 to, it ends in 2015, whatever that is. Anyway, so come back to 2014. Anyway, we're living in that decade of education for sustainable development. There were toolkits that the schools were to adopt, and the teachers during the summertime break were to examine their curriculums and do weeding of the curriculum. That was the term that was used, to weed the curriculum and take out a contact, because they only go to school for 5.5 hours a day, so how are they going to fit in a sustainable agenda in there with additional class, mind-building classes on the environment and being good global citizens? Well, they had to extract something and put this in its place. So they took out things, and we saw kids' school day change. We got rid of PE, we got rid of a lot of stuff. They weeded the curriculum to insert something else. All right. We also saw the densification plans come to fruition in the state of Oklahoma. More densification. Maps 1, 2, and 3 in Oklahoma. We saw Step Up Tulsa. We saw Tulsa Talks, Step Up Tulsa. There was another one in between there. And then finally culminated in Planet Tulsa, which is the long-term comprehensive development plan, all around densifying the core, creating transit-oriented districts, etc. That has a common denominator in there as well as not only changing the zoning codes, but data collection. Then we did an examination of earmarks, and Vicki, I was on the phone with her a lot when I was driving around Shawnee, Oklahoma, like that. I said, Vicki, I think I'm seeing one of those Trojan triangles here. Anyway, so I started, that was the odyssey of one summer. The session was over, and it was 2010, and I'm looking for earmarks for technology companies. I found one called Wave Technologies that had Oklahoma addresses. I thought, well, now's my chance. I'll go find out about Oklahoma. I've only lived here since the early 80s. So I drive around, and I sit down, and I actually had to stake out a place. I was at the Pizza Hut because they had a window, and right across the street in Shawnee, Kickapoo Street, was this building that looks like it used to be a house that is now converted into businesses. And on the left-hand side was the mailbox for Wave Technology. It had dust on it. And I looked in the door, because they had windows in the door, and I looked down, and it's just a single hallway with 4 office doors off to the left. I said, "There, nobody there." Well, there's another little office that used to be a house, and it was an insurance company, and I went over and asked them, I said, "Do you ever see anybody going in there?" I got a weird story to begin with, and they said, "Well, yeah, we often see young girls going in there." And now I'm thinking, okay, they use some foreign exchange students in there, and there's a computer, and that's all they're doing, or something else, I'm not sure what it is. But again, on the mailbox were sticky little WAVE, Wave Technologies, on Kickapoo Street, right? Dust on the mailbox, but that was a mailing address.
They were getting how much money?
Yeah. I called the county assessor's office, it's Potawatomi County Assessor's Office, and I asked about that address. Are they current on their taxes? Yeah, they're current on their rent. Well, they're paying $150 a month rent for that location. I had to make 2 trips to Shawnee before I actually found somebody. There's a hairdresser next door, by the way, and I went in and asked the hairdresser if they have people in there, and I said, "Did you ever see anybody next door?" Well, there was a guy in there for a while, but I haven't seen him. Well, on my second trip, I actually saw somebody, the door was open on the Wave Technology hallway, so I go in there, and all those doors are just blank doors, and they have a little keypad next to them for security, and I'm looking at it like there's nobody, and finally the last door in the hallway is open, so I go in there, and there's a lady that's got a massage parlor, no kidding. A nice young woman, clean cut, and she does therapeutic massage. It's a little small business, and I'm going, so all these are not Wave Technologies. There's only one office here. The rest of them are rented for somebody else. So that explains the young women coming in. There was nobody there. I found another address for them because on Wave Technology's website, there's a picture of a single-story brick building with some trees in front of it, and they're saying this is Wave Technology. Well, I do an address search on that, and I go further into Shawnee, and I find that right across from an Air Force base is now the Department of Motor Vehicles, where you go get your licenses, and that's the address for Wave Technology. So I go in there and I ask around, I said, "Did this used to be something else?" They said, "Yeah, it was a business." Well, now it was a cable provider and the DMV for Shawnee. Well, a long time ago, I mean, that was the building. I went across the street and I took a picture of it, and that's the building on the website. No Wave Technology. There is no Wave Technology. There's no physical Wave Technology. There are no employees. There is a website. They've been getting government contracts. Well, drove all the way up to Ponca City and looked around up there because Wave Technology, the Army has arrived, and there was some sort of an agreement building. They had rented the entire 4th floor. Well, I go up into the 4th floor of this former bank building, and in there, and it's a closed hallway, and there's a door with a little peephole in it, and there's another company in there. I went into the ladies' room across the hallway, and I just give you a picture like that. And then I was like, well, I don't know who's here. At the end of the hallway was the Chilocco office, and that Chilocco is an interesting thing, and that's where Chilocco was an Indian tribe. It's a consortium of Indian tribes. And they had the first Oklahoma school for Indian kids at statehood. It was Chilocco, and it was to bring in tribes of Indian students to teach them a trade so that they could learn. They had 5,000 acres of land right at the border to Kansas. I looked around there, and you can still see it up there, but now it's under camera, lock, and key. The Defense Department has leased it from them, the Chilocco School. You cannot access it anymore, and that's where they're testing the drones and explosives and anthrax.
The biological?
Yeah. They're doing all of that up there. So this Indian school. But anyway, back in this building in Ponca City, in the hallway, you actually see this office. There's a guy, there's the Chilocco thing. And they've got a map on the wall of the Indian tribe. So there's a face of this Chilocco Indian tribe where they're going to rebuild the school. And the reality has been to lease to the Defense Department is now under 24/7 security, and they're testing drones. All right? So this got us into the whole examination of other earmarks for tech companies. I found these guys. This is in a house in Ponca City, and Triari is in a house in South Tulsa. Their corporate headquarters are in the houses. Okay, I'd like to know where the people are that work there. But you can, for a technology company, you can just have a website and it looks like you do something and produce something, and you get earmarks from the federal government. All right, State Chief Information Officer position in like 2009-10, we created the State's Chief Information Officer. This is a cabinet position, and it was created by law. And so the governor went from 15 cabinet positions to 16, makes a huge salary, and he has a staff, and his position is his job is to modernize government in Oklahoma. He is part of the National Association of Chief Information Officers. And one of the first things he did was pay Capgemini $1 million. He issued a contract for $1 million that Capgemini wanted to do a statewide IT assessment.
Who's Capgemini?
Capgemini is a global outsourcing, consulting, and technology company. Their headquarters are in France. They have American headquarters in Herndon, Virginia, which I actually believe is where the real seat of government is. Okay, so they did the assessment with the objective of consolidating and modernizing Oklahoma's all the information technology systems and communication systems that are owned by that are anywhere, they're associated with any state agency, statewide. The next thing we looked into was healthcare reform, which was all of last year into the fall. Created the website Exposing Healthcare Reform. Electronic health record on every single person, which are longitudinal, which Vicki talked about, tracking cradle to grave. Jenny knows about longitudinal, looking at longitudinal from beginning to end school records. Okay, they're all tied together. And a health record is not your medical record, it's everything about you. Then we got involved in fighting the two exchanges. There are two exchanges. There's an information exchange, which is alive and well, sharing information, being built. And then the insurance exchange is the exchange that we stopped 3 times, which is still pending. What was the common thread through all of those? Standardized digitized data collection, aggregation, and analysis and sharing via an advanced IT information technology system. That's the common thread. So for whatever purpose OKSAFE was formed, the issues that we have addressed, which we were led to these issues, have this in common since day one. All right, so now we're going to get some definitions here, which is technology and it's really, I always use it technology and information technology mixed. Really, they're separate. Technology could be as simple as a lever. It's a tool. It's something that an individual uses to make life easier, or it could be manufacturing or a process, like you're saying right there. And it deals with the creation and use of technical means and their interrelation with life, society, and the environment. Okay, nothing bad there. It makes life easier with technology. All right, we're all benefiting. Information technology is the development, installation, and implementation of computer systems and their applications. Computer systems is both hardware and software. It's the digital code. It is dependent on everything being expressed in digital format, zeros and ones, everything. That's information technology. All right. It also I would say that includes communication technology, which would be the phones and other media, electronic media. A TECHNATE, which Patrick Wood touched on, this is a picture from their literature back then. If you'll notice, it's in the entire North American continent plus Greenland. Technocracy is a concept of government by technicians, scientists and engineers who would oversee and administrate government and the economy. Framework for North American TECHNATE, which is an institutionalized and operational technocracy, was formulated in early 20th century by an influential group called the Technocracy Incorporated. And I have their study course downloaded and printed, and I think this is available on Scribe. You can find it. Just put in Technocracy Study Course. It's a PDF. It's available.
I found it on Amazon while we was talking.
There you go. And this group eventually published this study course. This came out of the efficiency movement, which was in the turn of the century. So one thing leads to another. Oklahoma Wesleyan president said ideas have consequences, right? They do have consequences. And if they don't recognize God as the supreme authority, there are serious consequences. All right, this is that book cover. And technocracy finds that the production and distribution of an abundance of physical wealth. Now see, they looked at this continent and saw that we had abundance of everything. Plus we had those scientists, the engineers, the chemists. We had the mathematicians. We were blessed in this country with all of these things, and we had the infrastructure in place. We had the manufacturing base, we had the communications base, we also had the transportation base, all more advanced than anybody else in the world. So they're looking at, this is where we're starting, because we're it. They advocated this balance between production and consumption, all right? And they needed to have a continental technique over the top of its governance of function. And Vicki was talking about function. It's a sequence of events that are related, whether it's transportation functions, everything to do with transportation. If it's a communication system, it's everything to do with that communication system. If it's field to table, it's everything from point thrown into the field all the way to delivery. If those are your functions. Okay? This is when I was looking at this, it's like, oh, that explains the cover of the Agenda 21 book, balance. See, the two, balance, production and consumption. Balance is a similar idea here. It's the two halves of the same thing. And the understood explanation or definition of sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And when I hear that, I always hear the echo of from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. The Marxist principle, okay? Everybody's gonna buy into that. It targets producers and consumers, and guess what? We're both, all right? So that's pretty, everybody here understands this. Chapter 4 of that says we gotta change consumption patterns. And down here it says balanced patterns of consumption worldwide, which the Earth, capital E, can support in the long term, reducing the use of energy and materials, modern industrial economies, okay? All those buzzwords were right there, just like in the Technocracy study course. Balance, production, and consumption. Same idea, same thought, same concept. In this book, if you look at it, is this diagram of functional sequences. These are the industrial functions, and over here are the service functions. There's a whole bunch of people in the service because automation takes care of all of this, so you really need a whole bunch of people who are just service-oriented. You don't need a lot of people who can do anything. Systems, and this is, CC is the continental constabulary. Continental constabulary, that's all of the defense and law enforcement, the justice system is global, or in this case, continental. SR is social relations. That would include the court systems. But as Vicki was pointing out, doesn't this just look like a flow chart? That is systems. And that was the idea back then. There were some very intelligent people in this country, well-read, who understood math, who understand science, who understand computation and logic, who devised this. Okay? The thing when I was talking to Continental Constabulary, talking to Vicki on the phone saying, oh my gosh, reading this, and she goes, I'm thinking Northcom, Stratcom, all the comms, okay? So, this is real. All right. This is published in the early 30s, and they were already doing physical inventories by nation of land and people. They did physical inventories of all produced goods, and I've only shown you a couple of their charts. These were available from the U.S. State Department, the Department of Agriculture, the Commerce Department, and other sources there. So they already had done a physical inventory. These are estimates, but these are the best guess because we were the most advanced country of all the minerals. When we think here resources, we're conditioned to think air and water, oil. There's millions of resources. I was going to do a presentation and just start with the first resource, start in alphabetical order. You can't even list in a book how many start with A. God created a magnificent thing when He created the earth. It has everything that we need is in it. And the American technate, that's the designated area, you can see right there, and then the rest of the world and then the total world, and the technate percent of the total world. And at one point, I mean, we were very heavy in petroleum and in natural gas, all these things. We were blessed, all right? But that was an inventory, all right? They also did energy, the world's work, the installed prime movers. Those were the ability to convert those raw materials into something useful or manufactured, all right? So in the United States, they looked at all these power plants that we have, the manufacturing plants, etc. And right there was the horsepower. It was all measured in horsepower. The technate was measuring energy consumption, so it would be, instead of moving, they were talking about moving from the price system based on the dollars to one based on energy consumption measured in ergs and joules. For the, anyway, kilowatt hours. Okay. Canada was the next one with 75 trillion. This is a billion. This is 75 million over here. World output of electricity in 1937, kilowatt hour. Look at this, kilowatt hour per capita. They're already planning it out. 770 in the technate, 141 in the rest of the world, and world total. But we're already getting this. That America produces such and such percentage of the world's resources or energy or something, that they consume this much, all right? That concept of making us seem like pigs has been there since this idea. But at this point, we weren't pigs, we were successful, all right? The different perspective. This was good back then, showing plenty. This has now been turned on its head to show abuse by us, to justify lowering our standard of living, because now it's global and we have to distribute production and consumption globally. All right? So it goes on, you can pretty well see that. All right. In order for these things to happen, when I mentioned Roosevelt, and this is really a good book, you know you're getting old when you read the same books your dad did. Okay, The Crisis of the Old Order by Arthur Schlesinger, and this is a book on Roosevelt. I had to go back and to understand Roosevelt in that time frame, because this was written during that time period. And Roosevelt, according to Patrick Wood in a statement in his interview, was offered the dictatorship of the technate, and he turned it down. Well, you know, obviously the ideas didn't go away, and they're very influential in other places, so the concept continued on. And out of the 30s came the Standardized Industrial Classification Manual, which was to assign a 4-digit number to every industry, okay? If you're going to start counting things, you have to assign a number to it so that you can measure. It can't just say coal, it has to have a number associated with it. Out of that survived until 1987, and then in that point on, we've used the North American Industry Classification System, or NAICS. And I don't want to get too far afield, but when the planning regions were devised under Nixon for the entire United States, 10 planning regions, all right? At the same time, the Department of Commerce, Department of Labor was saying, okay, in order for us to produce workers for a planned economy, we need to divide up the country in certain areas of the country. Each will get their assigned job in producing workers to work in this system, all right? So Oklahoma got assigned aerospace and some other things. That's it. Iowa got assigned some other stuff. Do you remember what it was? Iowa. So the schools were redesigned to produce workers in particular fields that the Department of Labor anticipated they would need workers in. All right? Now, NAICS, the classifications, if you go to the Quality Jobs Act in your state statutes, your state statutes for quality jobs, whatever a quality job is what the government decides it is. It has nothing to do with good or bad. The industry codes are all expressed in NAICS codes, and the quality jobs, if you produce, they give tax credit for certain categories of jobs in those industry codes. A company can come in, if you're in that industry code, you can set up shop in Oklahoma, and you'll get a tax credit. No taxes for 10 years as you develop that business, and these schools will produce workers to work in that industry. So what we get are aerospace and the other industries that are assigned to Oklahoma. In a free society, you go to school, you have innate certain abilities, and you go to school, get a liberal arts education, and whatever those innate abilities are that God gave you have been educated to the point where you can go out and make a decision on what you want to do for a living. Planned economy is not the case. You're going to get channeled into what the Department of Labor says that you need. In order to compare what they are, you have to have a classification in it. So it ties into the tax credits are tied to the NACE codes. The NACE codes are tied to the education system. Everything is the same. And I also wanted to look at the codes were originally meant to obtain statistical data on economic status of the U.S. However, the Environmental Protection Agency and Occupation, whatever they are now also using the codes for regulatory and survey purposes. And that's from a 1-800-RECYCLE website. But they already understand that that's used to make decisions on compliance for NACE code. You don't really have freedom. You fit into a classification system. Okay? I believe, and I haven't looked into this for very long, so I don't really want to know, but out of the same time frame came the Uniform Commercial Code. A lot of the state's laws are changed to bring our state laws into alignment with the Universal Commercial Code. And I was looking it up to see if the Universal Commercial Code is now the same as the International Commercial Code, and they are moving toward that. So there's a single code for commerce. Okay? This gets into the issue of which law. And I'm going to read a quote from this book. And when this book was written, some of the key influencers were Charles Darwin and the evolution of the species. People who thought human beings perceived it as matter made out of inorganic material, subject to change, evolutionary change, the same as rocks and trees and whatever, okay, and animals. All right, humans were animals, and as such could evolve, be made better. Transhumanism could be made better, and faulty ones will not be made better. So there's that. Ivan Pavlov with conditioned response study on how to get those changes out of people, how they react to Pavlov's dog was, you ring a bell, the dog, and the food was put out, then the dog automatically after time would, when the bell would ring, the salivary glands would start, and he would automatically start to salivate just by hearing the bell. That's conditioned reflex responses, all right? Thinking of people as animals, conditioned responses were practiced, all right, to see what they would be willing to do, or what you can train them to do. Now, I always think of the political process as conditioned response. For instance, if a candidate, the delegate process we just went through in Tulsa County, if you've been lobbying, you already know why the personhood bill failed in Oklahoma, and it was the existing Oklahomans for Life organization that quashed it, and yet the lead of that, the head of that organization, a man named Tony, was one of the key reasons the personhood bill was failed. Yet he wanted to be a delegate to the national convention. So we're at the convention. He's introduced by a legislator. He's pro-life. Nobody has worked harder for issues of pro-life. So like ringing the bell, the people in there check, Tony, delegate goes. All you have to do is say pro-life, operant condition, send them. Okay? If you think that the political operatives do not know the trigger words, the key words, the phrases to use to get you to react in a certain way, you are naive. That's the entire political process. Okay. All right, so now it says, this is in the Technocracy study course. All right, so we got the evolutionary principle, Ivan's operant conditioning, the efficiency movement, making man more efficient, rational thought, all these things, and realism are all there. So he's now saying, in the Declaration of Independence, there occurs a line, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all are created equal. This concept is philosophical in origin. As we have seen, it has no basis in logical and biologic fact. Upon biologic fact, theories of democracy go to pieces. Well, we've seen that because they think we're evolving. And you can't have an inherent right because technocracy says you are like a machine and we're operating under business principles and efficiency principles. There's no philosophy involved. There's no God in that except efficiency. So now what this says, law and economics, realism or democracy. And I'll just quote the first line. It says, is law and economics anti-democratic? One hears complaints for many quarters that law and economics is a form of technocracy that cuts off legitimate debate and suppresses other important values that people hold dear. And it goes on to explain the laws reflect the needs of technology. And if that's the case, that's legal realism, how do you make that compatible with inherent rights? You don't have inherent rights because technocracy, the technology, is the decider, not rights. And Patrick Wood made a statement in his presentation, I quote, technology decides everything. And that's true. That's why constitutional arguments go nowhere, because the law is reflecting a realism that we haven't accepted in our head, that is based on what technology needs or what the economy needs, the law and economics, and it is inherently anti-person in favor of the economy or the technology. Okay? All right, so now we're going on to government modernization. I already touched on that a little bit. This is a report that Capgemini, $1 million, did. They did an assessment of all the IT systems across the state. Some of the agencies didn't want to cooperate. Good for them. And it goes from government to governance. There's a difference. Governance, remember, is functional in its makeup and is not representational. It's purely rational. So governance, modernization talking points, and you use some of the same ones in there. We're going to eliminate waste, create efficiencies, and reduce fragmentation. Why? Because you're creating systems. Okay? Promoted by and for the development of technology systems run by technology experts, and in this case, every state created the Chief Information Officer's position to oversee this. And I'll tell you that ours, who's named Alex Pettit, is a member of the National Association of Chief Information Officers. We did an open records request, and I got his emails, and on there you can see who his colleagues are. They work for 3M. They work for all these corporations. That's who he's associated with. That's who he's emailing about our government. It's not our elected officials. It is sure not department head. It's others who are in the IT business. That's the association. That's who we're trying to please. This eventually leads to outsourcing of government services and functions. States no longer control their own systems. It's not efficient. All right, this is my attempt. Like I said, I was in retail for 16 years. I was in management. I worked with large corporations. And you had stores or divisions and then you had a headquarters, all right? The IT systems were always managed by were out of state, and they were managed someplace else, like St. Louis or Houston, okay? So you had dumb terminals in the store, and they would feed the information to Central, which was either in Houston at one time, or actually it was Detroit when I was working for Kmart. St. Harrison Foley's, the systems headquarters were in Houston, and then when it was became Macy's, I left by then. Theirs are in St. Louis. The data centers are there. So I was thinking, okay, this is looking like a retail model. If we do this outsourcing, we've got government functions where you have all these different agencies. If you control your own IT systems, it stays within the state. Okay? Alex Pettit is saying those are the differences that don't make a difference. You can do something else with that. And he claims it's not going to be outsourced. But there's all kinds of definitions of outsourcing. All right? So what they're doing is consolidating the different, reducing the number of central processing units, mainframe computers from 7 to 4 or 11 to 7, something, reducing the mainframe, And he keeps saying those are some of those differences that don't make a difference. And what we're actually going to, what I believe is more of a regional information technology model, and all those things, all those services can be outsourced, external IT, because government service is delivered via an technology or communication system. Okay? This is Capgemini's from their brochure. They did get stimulus money, and they do healthcare records. They do all kinds of stuff. This is their diagram. This is all the systems that they're involved in. Like I said, their headquarters are in Paris, France. They're global. Outsourcing services, consulting and transformation services, information technology services, cloud, etc. You can see that. So they produced an as-is, a to-be, and a roadmap to get there for Oklahoma legislatures. The governor accepted it, and the state's implementing it. Jason Murphy. Okay, where did it go?
At least they have green IT.
There. Okay. The governor, State Technology Applications Review Board. I guess I put a timer on it. Anyway, Alex Pettit's on top. So this is a better diagram of that. So here's Oklahoma. It's IT systems where we have state agencies in charge of it, et cetera. And this was a distributed model. As it was, we have 77 counties, over 600 cities and towns. Well, generally, you should have your own IT system. You should have your own communication system. If nothing else, in case that one goes down, you don't take down everybody. But what they're doing is consolidating this so that the chief information officer buys all the computer systems. Everything is interoperable and is controlled by a central repository. And the overseer of the money to do this, we had a broadband grant, multi-million-dollar broadband grant, and the Office of State Finance is overseeing that, and they're changing their name to an enterprise something management. So now, so now you can outsource the business services, and somebody else can control state government because it's a function, just like anybody else's functions. Okay.
Now, can you go back a slide because I saw something interesting. Did you see that it says human capital services?
We know that word.
Human capital.
Yes. Well, resources include us. Resources, and I tell you, gosh, we just can't find Americans to do those jobs. You can have people from India do that, and you can call, let's say you've got, here's the scenario a few years from now, you got an IT problem, you get Hassan in South India, who will walk you through it if you work for the state. Okay, so there it is, what we're doing. Now, sustainable development is based on the concept of monitoring people's usages of resources, their compliance. And this is a company I found. They're out of Spain, and it's called Labellium. And they have 50 sensor applications. Beautiful website. You can click on each one of these apps, and you can find out what kind of sensor they offer. Well, they offer this really neat WASP thing, or mode, whatever. And that, if you put that in there, it can read all sensors. Anything that sends a signal, they can read it all, everywhere. And you can monitor compliance, and you'll never know it. It's monitoring compliance, selling software and hardware. There's a lot of money in it because this is the economy. It's based on data collection, knowledge-based economy. That's it. There it is, the WASP mode and Meshlium. Labellium's value chain. Doesn't it sound cool? Okay, this is so great. Okay, technocracy and sustainable development are global control of resources via systems. Global control of assets via systems, global transportation via systems, global supply chain management via systems. You see a common thread here? Okay, if you wanted to watch some technocracy video links, there's a bunch that are there. And I was going to include this slide, but all of this works because everything became digital, and this is more modern. That's the Chicago 911 center. That's the smart meter. Those are the satellites, and there's the digital man. Okay?